Well, good morning, Memorial Road. Happy Mother's Day. Before I launch into a sermon, I want to let you know of a save the date so you can mark this on your calendars. June 6th is the year anniversary of our first parking lot service from 2020. And so what we'd like to do on that day is we're going to go back to the parking lot. Not for 3 months, but for just one Sunday morning. It'll be one service. It'll be bring your chair again, and we're just going to remember what it was like. It was a big year, and it was a hard year, and we think it's really important to remember how God got us through that year. And I personally am ready to remember the only time I've ever got a sunburn from preaching. And so we're going to go out there for one day. And so I'm excited about that. And we have some other things we're hoping to do that day as well to make it special, which we will let you know about later. But for now, just mark the date on the calendar. And we'll even get the times to you a little later. But it will be one service first, and then a Bible class will follow. So that's June 6th. Today is the last sermon in a series we've been calling Fear-Less for quite some time now. And I'll tell you one more time, the whole premise of the series is that it is impossible to totally be fearless. It's not going to happen. But it is possible to fear less. You can wake up tomorrow and have less fear than you did today. And I hope throughout the series that maybe your fear has gone down just a little bit. I want to show you one cool picture that Amelia Jones took a few weeks ago of our billboard. And I wish I had like a great point or story behind it, but I just thought it was really cool. I mean, just rainbow on rainbow. I just thought that was great. So there's a great picture. Now, today is Mother's Day. And if you've ever wondered if you have got your mom something in the past that she didn't like as a gift, then the chances are she probably didn't. In fact, I read a survey recently which said 40% of moms have received a gift that they did not like. Now, this doesn't mean that every year they don't like it. It just means at some point, most moms are going to get a gift that they don't really like. In fact, this article went on to point out the top 5 worst gifts of all time. I'm going to share these with you, and these are not in theory. These are actual gifts that actual people gave to their mothers. Here we go. Number 5, a fire extinguisher. Probably don't want to give that to your mom. Number 4, a screwdriver. Number 3, cleaning supplies. I know, that's not good. Number 2, toilet paper. And number 1, deodorant. So if any of you have these gifts hiding in a closet at home, please return them. Do not give these to your mothers. The Washington Post ran an article about 6 months ago in the middle of the pandemic entitled, "Working Moms Are Not Okay." And the article was about this story that mothers, in many ways, were some of the unsung sufferers of the pandemic. Obviously, this year was hard for a lot of people, but for moms, especially moms with little kids, this was really, really hard. So the article told lots of stories about moms. For example, it told the story about a mom named Taylor who worked in sales and was required to make 100 calls a week. And then the pandemic hit, and she had to start doing school with her kids at home. And so in between her calls, she would be helping one kid with homework and then another kid, and it got too much. In fact, the article had this very accurate line which said she had to be a teacher, a disciplinarian, a mental health counselor, an extracurricular activities director on top of her sales job. Now for Taylor, she actually eventually lost her job simply because she couldn't get it all done. In fact, in September 2020, which was one of the worst months for unemployment of the year, I'll tell you about the men first. Men in this country, 200,000 men lost their jobs in September. 860,000 women lost their jobs in the month of September. Most of those being mothers who simply could not find enough hours in the week to balance everything they had to do at work with everything they had to do at home. All in all, in 2020, 3 million women left the workforce in this country, and again, the majority of these are moms. So mothers acutely felt this tension this past year, and I know even in this room, those are big stats, but I know a lot of moms in the room are thinking, I get it, that was me, I understand this was hard, or maybe you know of a friend, or maybe it was your mom, like we know this, like this was really, really hard. So the stats are on one level, but I want to go underneath that level since this series is about fear. I want to talk for a minute about what the fears of moms are. At the beginning of the series, I asked everybody to submit things that you fear, and a lot of these fears came from moms. And some of the fears that came in were things like, I'm afraid that as I spend so much time investing in my children, that my marriage is just going to erode. Or in a similar vein, moms would say, I'm afraid that because of all the hours I'm spending doing the things that I need to get done for my kids and at home, I'm afraid that my relationship with God is going to fade. But by far, the number one fear that mothers submitted was fear of the future of their kids. Some of that was on the safety category, and just fearing of the safety of the children, but another one was the fear of loss of faith. This is a really, really big one for mothers. Galatians 6:2 says that we're supposed to carry each other's burdens, and so in this way we fulfill the law of Christ. And I'll tell you, moms, what I wish this sermon could do, I wish it could just take away that burden you feel and the fear that you feel when it comes to your kids. But I can't do that, and the sermon can't do that. And so what I'm hoping, maybe as a plan B, is I'm hoping that this particular sermon is a way in which we as your church family can just share that burden for a few minutes. And I'll say at the outset of this particular message, it's one thing for me to preach this message, and it's going to, at the end of the message, I'm going to try to give you some super practical ways that you can bless not just your own mother, because obviously many people have lost mothers. But I want to give you ways you can bless mothers in general. But I will say it's one thing for me to preach this, but if you really want to make a difference in your mom's life, you got to apply it. This is one of those messages you got to apply it. I want to tell you the story of a mother in the Bible. It's not Mary, it's not Hannah, it's not Sarah. This mother doesn't get a lot of press at all. In fact, we don't know her name. There's so little written about her. But she pops up in Mark chapter 5, and I want to try to construct a plausible storyline for what might be going on in her life based on a few of the clues that we find in Mark chapter 5. So we're going to say for our purposes today that her name is Miriam, and she lives in a little village just off the Sea of Galilee. She's married to a synagogue ruler, which back in the day, this would have been a lay position. And so her husband would have been responsible for synagogue meetings on Saturdays. And so he would have done a lot of upkeep of the building. He would have organized who was reading scripture on various days at synagogue. And so one of her jobs would have been, when people traveled in, there was big Sabbath day meals, which would start on Friday evening. And so if there was any kind of leader or even friend coming in for synagogue on Saturday, she would every single week have a pretty big job of getting that meal ready on Friday. And so she would have likely been this strong person that did a lot of work behind the scenes to allow her husband to flourish in this position. We also know about Miriam that she had at least one kid, probably multiple kids, but we know she had a daughter. And this daughter would have, in all likelihood, probably had a pretty good childhood. Being the daughter of a synagogue ruler would have actually been a pretty cool gig for a child. In fact, a quick show of hands here. How many of you at some point in your life, probably as a kid, played hide and seek in a church building? I feel like it's just a rite of passage for Christians. Just, you play hide and seek in the church building, and then you get baptized. It's just right there. I would speculate that this girl grows up. That's what she's doing every weekend, is helping her dad and her mom get the building ready for the people. And so she probably knows all the ins and outs of the synagogue. That's just kind of her gig. They also live right by the Sea of Galilee, so you got to think that this girl grows up with her friends and cousins, probably on a daily, if not weekly basis, playing on the beach of the Sea of Galilee. So she probably has a really, really good childhood. The daughter turns 12. She gets really sick. And so you can imagine Miriam laying her daughter down, getting a wet wash rag, dabbing her forehead, giving her water, waiting it out a few days. And then when the sickness doesn't leave after a few days, Miriam starts to get really worried. And so she calls the local doctor in town, and the doctor comes in, and he does whatever he can, but that's not working, and her daughter stays sick, and she's getting sicker and sicker and sicker, and Miriam can do nothing at this point except get on her knees every day and just beg God to save her daughter. Well, one day Miriam gets word that Jesus of Nazareth has just arrived on a boat. And so you can imagine a scene where Miriam sits down with her husband and says, one of us is going to have to go talk to him. And I know we're the synagogue people, and we're not supposed to be aligning ourselves with this Messiah, but one of us is going to have to talk to him because we're desperate. So they have a conversation and decide, well, Miriam's going to stay, and her husband's going to go, because Miriam just can't leave the bedside of this beautiful, dying girl. So that's a plausible backstory. And now I want to pick up in the text in Mark chapter 5 and read what Scripture says about this. Verse 22, then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, my little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. And so Jesus went with him. Now, all the while, I would imagine Miriam still just on her knees, praying, begging God to save her daughter's life. Well, if you remember this story, Jesus starts on the way to Jairus' house, and on the way, he's interrupted by this other woman, and she's not in a good place. She's had this sickness for quite a while. She's been bleeding for years. And so she's in agony, and she doesn't really know if she wants to make a big scene. She's embarrassed, and so she just comes up to Jesus and touches the hem of his garment, but he stops and he has a conversation with her, and he listens to her, and he ends up healing her. And then in the middle of this, what Miriam would consider this interruption, in the middle of all that, Miriam's daughter dies. And Miriam has been sitting there probably just holding her hand and watching her breathe, and then all of a sudden she takes her last breath and passes away. And at this point, Miriam has the wherewithal to send a servant to go tell the traveling rabbi, you don't need to come anymore because my daughter is dead. And then the friends and the family come into Miriam's home, and everybody starts weeping together. Verse 38, when they, as in Jesus and the disciples, came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother. Now I want to pause here because that word mother is the only reference to this woman I'm calling Miriam. I'm constructing a plausible backstory, but that's the only time she's actually mentioned in the text. And I find this really interesting because even though she hadn't spoken to him to this point, and she was not the one that came to get Jesus on the road, that was her husband. In fact, she's had no role in the story thus far. For all we know, she's never laid her eyes on Jesus, and he comes into the scene, and even though Jesus has everybody else leave, he still has her stay. He says, no, I want you here. So she stays, everybody else leaves. There's probably this fairly large pause, moment of silence. And then, verse 41, Jesus took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. And Miriam watches, and her beautiful, innocent little girl opens her eyes and gives her mom a hug that she'll never forget. Now here's my question. Why does Jesus ask her to stay? And the best explanation I can give to that is simply that Jesus understands the heart of a mom. Miriam has been behind the scenes the whole time, probably thinking no one notices what I'm doing. Nobody sees the parenting I'm doing. No one sees the heartache that I'm having. But Jesus comes into the story and says, I do. I see it. I want you to stay. In fact, one thing I find is super interesting here is that this is not the only time Jesus does this with a mom. If you read carefully the stories of the Gospels, Jesus is consistently stopping, reaching out, pausing, listening, and loving mothers. For example, Matthew 15, this Canaanite mother comes up to Jesus. And at first, Jesus says that that's not my primary mission. But then he dialogues with her. He listens to her, and he says, okay, I'm going to go take care of your need. It's because he has a heart for moms. Or my favorite is Luke 7, where Jesus is actually in this large crowd of people entering the town of Nain, and there's another large crowd of people exiting the town, which is a funeral procession. And so you have this really interesting phenomenon where two groups of probably hundreds of people collide, and Jesus is looking into the sea of people, and he sees one. It's the mom. And I love this sentence in Luke. I don't think it's on the screen, but it just says that his heart went out to her. And he went to her and took care of her need. See, Jesus, he gets moms. He understands the heart of motherhood. And so even when moms think that no one sees their sleepless nights and no one understands the work they do in the shadows and no one really gets what their fears are, Jesus says, I do. I see you. You matter. I want you in the story. I want to hear your voice. Jesus understands the heart of a mom. Now, taking our cues from Jesus, what I want to offer is I want to suggest 3 things that we can all do for moms. 3 things. Now, it's one thing if I say them, but again, this is where you got to apply them for them to really start to make a difference in the life of your mom. So the first one is this. If you want to make a difference in the life of your mom, lend her a hand. It's actually really interesting because in this story, hands take center stage. So in verse 23, when Jairus comes to request Jesus' help, what he says is, will you come and take my daughter's hand to heal her? And then at the end of the story, in verse 41, Jesus does, in fact, take her by the hand to raise her from the dead. So hands are very much at the center of the story. And the broader point here is that Jesus is saying, I don't just want to hear the problem, I actually want to do something about it. I want to work on behalf of these moms to alleviate their burden. Another example of this would be in the middle of this story when this second woman comes up and seeks healing from Jesus. Jesus has this really interesting line where he says, my power has gone out from me. In other words, Jesus understands that what he has done in the moment is actually exert effort on behalf of this hurting woman. And so I think we should take our cues from Jesus here and try to do the same thing for moms. Now, we don't have the power of miraculous healing, but what we can do is if you want to alleviate the burden of a mom in your life, try to share that burden. So maybe a mom in your life, maybe she's the one that always does the social events calendar. Well, maybe one week you take it on yourself to do that. Maybe she's always the one planning the vacations. Maybe you do that yourself. Maybe she's the one that helps with the kids' homework. Maybe you do that this week. Maybe she's the one that is doing the cooking or doing the cleaning or doing the laundry. If you want to bless her, lend her a hand. Take your cues from Jesus. And I will say this very specifically to kids listening to me. If you're still tracking with me, here's what will make your mom's heart sing for joy. If you can lend her a hand without being asked. She will be so proud of you. Can I get an amen from the moms? Kids, you can do this. Here's a second thing you can do to love moms. Again, we're taking our cues from Jesus in this story. If you want to love moms, love their kids. Blessing the child of a mother is the greatest way to bring honor to that mother. Think about this. Jesus asked the mom to stay, and how does he bless her? Well, he loves her kid. The other day, just probably 3 weeks ago, a month ago, Mary and I, my wife, were talking at the end of our day. We're debriefing the day. How was your day? And Mary said, Phil, the best part of my day was somebody from church said something really, really sweet about Anna and Heidi, our kids. And I said, Mary, why do you think that was so significant? And she said, well, Phil, I obviously am their mom, and so I think they're great, and I think they're beautiful, I think they're smart, I think they're talented. But when someone else points that out, it just makes me feel so good as a mother. Well, this is true. If you want to bless someone else as a mom, find a way to bless that mom's kids. And I'm telling you, that's really going to bless the mom's life. Here's a third thing we can do for moms. Again, taking our cues from Jesus in this story. And this one's pretty simple. It's just listen to mothers. Just listen to them. Jesus made a really big habit of this all throughout his ministry, where he would just pause whatever he was doing, and he would listen to the voice of mothers. We think, oh yeah, this is normal. This is what Jesus does. Jesus is Jesus. He's kind. He's compassionate. This is what he does. That might be one of the more controversial things Jesus actually did in his ministry, because Jesus lived in a time where the voices of mothers, and really broadly speaking, the voices of women, were not recognized in broader culture. In fact, historian Josephus, who wrote so much about just history of what was going on in the world at this time, he has this really off-putting line where he tells us how women were viewed in that day. He says this, "But let not the testimony of women be admitted," and he's talking about in court, "on account of the levity and boldness of their sex." Very off-putting. But that was the normative view of women in that culture. We don't listen to them. We don't really care what they say. If they do give their viewpoint, it's going to be worthless, at least in a court setting, because that's just how women were viewed and treated at the time. And then what's amazing about the story of Jesus is that you have this traveling rabbi who's the Son of God, and he walks around and he wants to stop everything he's doing to listen to mothers and to listen to women. In fact, in this healing story, the mom she's not in the story at all. It's all Jairus and Jairus' daughter, but when Jesus gets there, he says, no, she's staying because her voice matters. And even in the middle of the story, when this woman comes and touches Jesus' the hem of his garment, Jesus stops. Again, this is so significant. Jesus is on his way to save somebody's life. And so if there's ever a moment where you have the excuse to say, hey, I get what you're saying, but if you can just wait, give me 1 hour, I'll be right back. I'll just meet you at this well right here. Just stay. I'm coming right back. Like, this is the moment where Jesus could have said that. But he says, no, I'm going to stop. I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to hear your story, even though there's hundreds of people crowding around me. I'm going to look you in the eye. I'm going to hear your story. In fact, one of the most remarkable parts about this episode, the middle episode of healing this woman, is Jesus calls this woman daughter. When Jesus came into the world, one of the things he completely revolutionized was the way people viewed and treated moms in particular, but women in general. Jesus always listened to them. In fact, one more example of this, think about this. The climax of Jesus' entire ministry is what we know as the gospel. 1 Corinthians 15, Jesus died, and then 3 days later, Jesus rose from the dead to save us from our sins and to break the very power of death itself. It's why we worship today. It's the centerpiece of Christianity. When Jesus rises from the dead, have you ever thought about this? Who's the very first person he appears to? It's not Peter. It's not John. It's Mary. And he tells her, I want you to go tell my disciples that I'm not dead. So in a world where the testimony of women really wasn't even accepted, Jesus tells a woman. And Mary becomes the first witness and the first proclaimer of the resurrection. In fact, if you just trace back why you're a Christian, you're probably a Christian because maybe your parents taught you about Jesus, maybe you had a minister or a preacher teach you about Jesus, and they probably used the Bible to teach you about Jesus. Well, the reason we have the Bible, especially the New Testament, is because these men took great care in writing these stories about Jesus down so that for thousands of years we can now know about what God did in the world through His Son, Jesus Christ. But when you think about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, where they got their stories from the stories that were being told at the time. And who was the very first person to tell the story of resurrection? It was Mary. So the reason you know about Jesus is because of a woman. This is who Jesus was. Jesus always took time to listen to moms. He took time to listen to women. And so if you want to bless a mom today, I would encourage you to pause and to listen. In fact, I want to give you a few questions that you can ask today. If you have a mom and you're going to be hanging out with your mom today, here's questions you can ask your mom. If you don't have a mom, if your mom has passed away, these are just questions you can ask to any mom. It could be your wife. It could be another family member. But if you know me, I really like good questions, and there's a reason for that. I think good questions lead to good conversations. Good conversations lead to good community. Good community leads to a good life. And so questions are really, really important. So here's 3 that I would encourage you to ask today to some mom in your life. Question 1 is a very simple question. What do you love about being a mom? Question 2 is what's really hard about being a mom? Question 3 is if you could relive one day or one season of motherhood, what would you relive? What do you love about being a mom? What's hard about being a mom? And if you could relive one day, one season, what would that be? Ask these questions and then just take some time to listen to your mom. So I want to tell you about one mother hero. Her name is Anna Marie. And she lived in a long time ago. This is Civil War era. And she had a hard life. Early in her life, she dreamed about going to college, getting an education, and that got completely derailed in the Civil War. She had to give up that dream. She had 13 kids. 7 of her kids died in childbirth. Some in childbirth and then some just as they were young children. And so she spent a lot of her life with the remaining 6, trying to love them and nurture them and bring them up. She's a faithful Christian, went to church every week, taught Sunday school every week. Well, she really started to make a name for herself in the middle of the Civil War. She lived on the divide between West Virginia and Virginia. And if you've forgotten a little bit of U.S. history there, the whole reason that there's a West Virginia and a Virginia is because of the Civil War. They divided in that war, Confederate, Union, and so the state split. She lived right on the divide. And one of the really fascinating things that she decided to do in the middle of the war is she started organizing medical attention for both sides of the war. And so she organized all these doctors and nurses, and they started treating soldiers on the Confederate Army, soldiers on the Union Army, trying to bring healing to these people. After the war was over, the country turned from fighting to healing, and she knew a lot of people who their families had divided because of the Civil War, because she's right on the border. So she knew one dad over here, and he never talked to his son anymore because they fought on opposite sides of the war. And she knew one mom over here, and the daughter had married a son on the other side, and they didn't talk to each other anymore. And so these families were completely crushed, completely broken. They wouldn't talk to each other. And so she picked a particular day, and she organized this reconciliation and forgiveness day. And because of her reputation of all the medical things she had done for people, all these people came to the center of the divide, and dozens and dozens and dozens of families found forgiveness and healing and reconciliation because of what Anna Marie did. She lived a pretty long life. She died on the second Sunday in May, 1905. The next year, her remaining kids got together to celebrate the legacy of her mom. They did it the following year. 1908, she had such a great reputation that the entire city decided, you know what, we're all going to get together on the second Sunday of May, and we're going to celebrate Anna Marie. Well, a few years later, the President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, found out about this story, and so in 1914 he said, I think our whole country needs to celebrate this. And so he declared the second Sunday of May is from then on going to be called Mother's Day. And so the reason that we're thinking about moms today and the reason we're celebrating mothers today is really two reasons. One, a wonderful woman named Anna Marie lived an incredible life as a peacemaker. But the second reason we're celebrating Mother's Day is because her children told her story. And so one more thing I'd encourage you to do is figure out a way to tell the story of your mom, because she deserves to have her story told. One thing I've learned from moms of all ages is that mothers really do care about the faith of their kids. And so if you're wanting to really show your mom that you care today, definitely don't get her a fire extinguisher. But if you really want to show her that you care, say something today to her which indicates that you really are trying to walk with God. I'm saying even if you're far from God, give her some indication that you're trying to come back to Him. So we're about to worship together, and I will say, one thing that would make your mom's day is if you've never become a Christian, this would be a great day to do it. It would really bless your mom's heart.